Tanu Rabbanan. Okay, and we're dealing with, or Ravo Shel Mayim. We're dealing with the Nisa Chamayim that was done. We discussed the how you would go up, make a left turn instead of a right turn. There were two funnels, one on the southwest corner of the altar. The one on the east, the funnel facing the east, was for the wine. The one on the west was for the water. Okay, and then they said to the Kohen, lift up your hand so we can see what you're doing, because once he poured it on his feet intentionally, he didn't believe in it, he was a Saduki, and everybody stoned him with their esrog. So now they wanted to use the obviously communal pressure to make sure he was doing the right thing. All right, Tanu Rabbanan. There's a story of a certain Sadducee, Shenisach al Gabe Raglav, that poured the Nisachai Mayim on his feet. And everybody stoned him with their esrogim that we sort of saw in the Mishnah, although here Dad said he was a Tzeduki. And now it goes on. That day, the horn of the altar, at the top of the Mizbeach, at each corner, there was like there was a cube, an amma by an amma by an amma, at the four corners at the top of the altar, and that was called the horns of the altar. So, and that's where he was doing the pouring, right? He was doing the pouring in the corners, so he was doing it right near the horn. So when they threw him, some of the esrogim hit the horn. So that day, the horn of the altar was chipped. Hiviu bul shel melech, and they brought a clump of salt, v'satmuhu, and they filled up the chip. I don't really get how you do that with salt, and these things were made out of plaster. I'm not sure. Somebody will explain it to me. Anyway, not that makes it kosher to do the avoda. That doesn't really fix the problem. It only helps his appearances. It's not a real structural fix of the horn. And as we're going to see, if you don't have the horn and you don't have it in its right shape, it's actually invalid to continue doing the avoda on the altar. So this did not really fix it, and it did not really make it possible, therefore, to do the avoda. So that it should not, the altar should not seem to be chipped, or what's a better word for pagum? Lacking, damage, right? So it's appearances. You don't even want people to look at it and it should look bad. You don't want to just put up some scaffolding and say, please, what is it? Please forgive our appearances while we're remodeling. But anyway, but you actually don't want it. So even while you're waiting to fix it, you want it to look appropriate. And now we're going to discuss why that actually became invalid. Top of Mem Tet Amud Aleph. Shekol Mizbeach she'ein lo kevesh v'lo keren, any altar that is missing a ramp or is missing a horn, v'lo yisod, or doesn't have the foundation, the lowermost amma extension, v'lo ribua, or is lacking a being square, pasul avoda, is invalid for avoda. By the way, I should mention that the other place where the idea of ribua, square, really comes up, and a chip is a problem and so on, is tefillin, right? And if you think about it, the shape of the tefillin is pretty similar in the sense that you've got a cube and then you have a base, and you have a thin base and whatever. So it is interesting to note, the same idea of ribua. Now, of course, why are specifically these things? Well, let's just read one more line. Rabbi Yossi bar Yehuda Omer afa sovev, even the walk around, right? So if you remember, right, the way the altar looks. Whoops. Now what am I doing? I don't know how it is. Okay, now I lost track of what I was doing. That's the fan. All right, so this is the yesod. This is the sovev, right? And then these are the horns, keren. So it says any altar that doesn't have, what does it say? Chol mizbeach she'ein lo. Now my page switched. Lo kevesh. This is the ramp, although the ramp was run poorly. V'lo keren v'lo yesod. Not a horn and not a base, and lo ribua. And so any part, it doesn't have the sort of square shape that it's supposed to have. These things aren't good right angles. Is invalid. And Rabbi Yehuda says even the sove, even that. Okay. Now, where does where does the need of all of these things come? How do we know that those things are ma'akev? So, if you take a look, Rashi says it's because in all of these places in the Torah, it has the word Pnei HaMizbeach. So if you take a look at Rashi, the first narrow line of Rashi, he says, Kol makom shenemar, excuse me, not Pnei, but Hamizbeach. Well, I'm not starting in the beginning of Rashi. It's the first narrow line of Rashi. Kol makom shenemar Hamizbeach la'ake, the altar. It has to be exactly that way. Okay, Dahachi mashma Hamizbeach zewo mizbeach ha'asui kach. It has to be exactly this way. V'nei v'hanach b'chuluk siv Hamizbeach al konot Hamizbeach. So that's the idea of the corner or the horn. Excuse me. That's ba'echa v'miluim uvekevesh k'tiv el pnei Hamizbeach. The face, the hakeresh hu panav shamizbeach. It's the face because that's how you go up to it. Shu pitcho v'aliyato u'biyisod kiv el yisod hamizbeach u'beribua. The idea of being square. K'tiv ravua yiyeh hamizbeach. Okay, Rabbi Yosef Rabbi Yehuda Omer af hasovev ma'akvo dekasavar karkov hamizbeach. The karkov of the altar. What's karkov? It's a type of a netting of a design. No, he says zeu hasovev, that's the walk around. Nemar bo hamizbeach, and the rabbis say the karkov is something else. So all these things are needed. Now it's all very nice to say you need it. Why does the little chip in the horn invalidate? You still have the horn just because it's chipped. So this becomes a question about at what stage is something considered to be present or damaged, right? And how perfect does it have to be? So Tosfos, so the Gemara actually says, and there's a long Tosfos that discusses. First of all, there's another issue, which is if the altar is made out of stone, then there's a principle of avanim shleimot, right? Full, complete stones. I mean, you have this sort of double jeopardy that you can't, well, it's not double, what I mean, but you can't carve it. Lo tanifa lehem barzel. You can't use any iron. Okay, well, maybe you can break it, and how else do you get it the right shape? So it says avanim shleimot, but the stones have to be whole. So first of all, what does that mean? The way that they naturally find them in the ground. So one of the ideas then you'll never get stones the right shape. So one of the ideas of shleimot doesn't mean like whole, but means non-chipped, like perfect, smooth, perfect, and so on. So therefore, that's why you might be familiar. The Gemara claims that the way they solved this was this thing called the shamir, this worm that let out this acid that allowed it to be cut. Or in theory, Joseph says you could just break it, like without using iron, without using some metal to break it. But then it wouldn't be shalem, because shalem is like smooth and and unchipped and so on. But that's one of the ideas of shalem. Now, if that's true, it has nothing to do with this being a corner, right? Any stone used in the altar has to be shleimot. But the point is, and then Tosfos says, they didn't make the altar here with stones. I mean, as I'm just describing it, you can hear how impossible it would be to effectively make something with stones with these types of criteria. So what they actually made it with was plaster. That they actually used like a lot of pebbles, but filled it with cement and plaster and whatever, and they poured it into molds, which is a lot easier to get something in a particular shape if you're pouring it into molds. Okay, so so being chipped in itself is not a problem. So what is the problem? Well, the problem is at what stage does it stop being considered to be a square? How much of a chip, like if we're talking about like square, how much of a chip here undermines that sense of squareness, or how much of a chip on the horn stops it from being considered a full horn. So that's part of what this Tosfos discusses. Okay, the Gemara does not spell that out, but whatever it was, the horn was damaged enough that it was considered no longer a legitimate horn, and therefore, for appearance's sake, they stopped it up, but they would have to fix it before they could continue doing the avodah. Yes.
So essentially, the altar would have been an early form of concrete.
Yeah.
Except it wouldn't last very long because the plastering and cement they had back then was not very good, so you would have had to be making repairs on a regular basis.
Or is that really true, that they didn't have a good plaster?
About 150 years ago.
I don't understand. What did the Romans build their bridges out of? What did they build their aqueducts out of?
Stone. But the natural weight of the arches, even if you did build them without
all the Roman construction was basically hewn stone?
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah,
interesting.
Yeah.
So and they
Until late in the Empire times, when they started using wood more.
So I don't know. Because we don't hear about them having to regularly remake the Mizbeach.
Probably because it was so routine.
But maybe you're saying just like small repairs.
Yeah, small repairs. Yeah.
I see. Okay. All right. So the Gemara says like this. I'm Rabbi Yochanan. All right. So that was the story about the breaking of the horn. Now we're going to get to a famous Gemara, which will actually have an echo in another Gemara a little bit later, just in about 4 days from now, talking about where the wine would go and where they would pour it through the funnel. Okay. So let's take a look. I'm Rabbi Yochanan. So this is going to be a fun little Agadata. Shitin is the name that they give for the underground caverns. Well, it's a question if there's caverns, but the cavities, the place where the wine would go when it went into the altar. And basically, just to let you know, okay, there are two basic opinions about where the wine would go. They pour it here. Right, here's your funnel. They pour the wine down here. So where is it going? So there's a pipe, essentially inside, the hollow of the altar. Because remember, by the way, I just told you that they were sort of doing it by plaster, so you can pre-make this. Okay, so this is the plumbing that they had it was on the inside, not on the outside. You have to sort of get the idea here. I get to start like that. Okay. Anyway, a pipe going down on the inside. Now, where would it go? Where would the wine finally get into? So there's two opinions. One opinion, the more naturalist opinion that we'll see, is that it would just start filling up, the cavity of the altar, that they'd have a cavity in the bottom and the wine would fill that up. There's another opinion that basically says that the wine would go straight down, into the ground below. This actually would be like a tile floor, so it would break through the tile floor and it would go into some underground cavern. Okay, so this is the question about where would the wine go. But wherever it would go, the place that it is going is called the Shiti. Okay, and let's take a look. So Rabbi Yochanan, so said Rabbi Yochanan, these Shitin, Misheshes me Breishis Nivru. They are, he understands that they're natural underground caverns underneath the Har Habayis, and they were created from the 6 days of creation. Shene'amar, as the verse says, Chamukei Yirei Chayich, so Chamukei, question, I don't know, the English translation says the roundness of your thighs, but we'll see how the Gemara explains the word chamuk in a minute. Kimo chalaim ma'aseh yedei omein. So are like chalaim, also it possibly means in the pshat like jewels, jewelry, the work of craftsmen. Now this is being read as chamuk is the hidden. It's like the cleaving of your thighs, or the hidden area of your thighs. Okay, are like chalaim, are like. Well, let's take a look what the Gemara says. Okay, so chamukei yirechayik elu hashitim. These are the shitim because they're hidden, because they're underground. Okay, so where were we? Kimo chalaim are like chalaim. So what does chalaim here mean? Not jewels, but it means shemuchulalim v'yordim ad hatahom, that they are hollowed out and go down all the way to the very depths. Okay. Now the yerechayich here, by the way, also refers to the al yerech hamizbeach tzafona. Right. The Torah refers to the sides of the altar as the yerech. So the hidden, the chamukei yerechayich, the stuff that's hidden in the yerech, the sides of the altar, kimo chalaim are like like hollowed out, goes all the way down into the depths. Okay, so that's chamukei yerechayich elu hashitim kimo shemachalim v'yodim ad tahom maseh yedei omein ze maseh yedei umnato shel kadosh baruch hu, was all God's handiwork. So this was all created by God. Okay, so that's one interpretation, that it was all a natural underground cavern where this went, but it was first started as going through the hollow of the Mizbeach. Tana de Rabbi Shmuel, we taught in the house of Rabbi Shmuel, Bereshit, in the beginning. Al tikri Bereshit, do not read it in the beginning. Ella bara sheet. God created the sheet, the shitim, these underground caverns. Tanya, okay, so that's consistent with the idea that eventually it went into the underground caverns. Tanya, Rabbi Yossi Omer, shitin mechulin v'yordim ad hatahom. The shitim are hollowed out and go to the very depths. Shene'emar, as the verse says, and here's a beautiful little poem in Yeshayahu, which is sing a song to my beloved on his vineyard. And it's basic. Well, let's take a look. Ashirin al yididi, let me sing to my beloved. Shirat dodi lekarmo, a song to my beloved for his vineyard. Kerem hayal yididi, a vineyard had my beloved, Bekeren ben Shalman, in the horn of the hill, which was very quality, very rich land. Shaman, like Shamain, fatty, rich land. Vayazkeu, vayiskaleu, he dug it out and he removed the stones. Vayita'eu sorek, and he planted in it new shoots. Vayiven migdal b'tocho, and he built a tower in its midst to overlook, the area. V'gam yekev chatzav bo, and he even dug a wine vat in it. And then now the end of the verse says he expected to have amazing grapes, and then they turned out to be sour and terrible grapes. And it basically is about how God, brought out the Jewish people, planted them in Israel, and how they betrayed God and went astray. But the first part is very beautiful until we get to them going astray. So let's take a look at how the Gemara interprets it. Where were we? Okay.
No, that's the key phrase.
V'gam Yekev Chatzav Bo. Yeah, I just lost one. Yeah, it is. Yeah, but I just lost what we're up to. Hold on. Okay, 1 minute. Okay. Vayita'eu sorek. So he planted the shoot. Zubei Tamikdash. So he cleared out the space the Gemara is interpreting, but basically Rashi says that it could mean that he cleared out the land from the enemies, from the Canaanites, that's how he cleared it out. They cleared out the space of the Beis Hamikdash, the prior work that went to it. But anyway, he brought them into this beautiful land, and now up to Har Bayis, he planted the shoot. B'tei Sorek. Zebeit HaMikdash, he planted the Beis HaMikdash. Vayiven Migdal b'tocho, and then he created a tower in the midst. What is this tower? Zemizbeach, that's the altar, because, it's a big, high structure. V'gam Yekev Chatzav Bo, he dug in it a vat. Elu Hashitin, these are the shitin, that is the place where the wine goes into, because that's what a vat is. Okay? Now, that's Rashi's girsa of this. Tosfos has a slightly different girsa. If you take a look at Tosfos' girsa, Vayita'eu sorek zebeit hamikdash, Vayiven migdal. So first of all, he has sorek. So Vayiven migdal b'tocho zemizbeach v'gam yekev elu hashitin. Kach kosev b'chol asfarim. Zeu girsa shekudres. Aval b'Tosfos garsinan, b'Tosefta garsinan garas Vayiven migdal b'tocho zehichal. The migdal is the heichal, because whenever we do our drawing of the Beis Hamikdash, the place where you bring, where the menorah and the shulchan is, it was a huge, tall building. That's your migdal. V'gam yekev chatzav bo zemizbeach. The vat, the wine vat, is the altar. Why? The kari lemizbeach yekev nitnei shemenaskin alav hayayin, because that's where you pour the wine before it gets to the shitim. First it goes on the altar. That's the vat. Shemotzi mina yekavim. So where do you get the shitin from? If all it's talking about is the mizbeach. No, it says v'gam yakev, which is even an extension of this wine vat, which is the digging underneath. Okay, so now Tosfos also has another interesting position, which is that he says that this approach disagrees with the idea that they were created from Sheishes Yimei HaBreishis. Right, the first thing is Barashis, Sheishes Yimei HaBreishis, Maseh Yidei Oman, Zeh Kadosh Baruch Hu, Maseh Umnaso Shel Kadosh Baruch Hu. This talks about the practical act of clearing the space, of building the heichal. Right, when it says that he built the heichal, built the mizbeach. God's hand didn't come down and build the mizbeach. We mean through the acts of people, right? So therefore, according to this, even though it's agreeing that the shitin, these underground caverns, these shitin are underground caverns. That's where the wine went. It is not saying that it was natural. It's saying this was part of our construction of the Beis Hamikdash. Okay. Tani was on the Brisa. I'm Rabbi Linzer Barzado. Lukatan haya bein kevesh lemizbeach b'ma'aravo shel kevesh. There was a little trap door on in the space between the ramp and the altar, on the west side of the ramp. Once every 70 years, you need to clean out the shitim. So you would get the little children kohanim. That's what pirchei kun was, like, their facial hair is just sprouting, or they're sprouting up. Anyway, you would get the little children kohanim who are small, and they would go into this little a trap door, and they would clean out from the cavity all the congealed wine. It's so congealed and hardened, it was like these cakes of pressed dates. Pressed dates or pressed figs. I'm always getting that wrong.
Yeah.
Figs, pressed figs. Thank you. And they would go burn it in a holy place because it was still wine that had been used on the altar. It had been sanctified. In the holy place you shall do the libations. Nesech shechar laHashem, a libation of intoxicating liquid to God. So the same way its pouring is it's bakodesh hasech kach sreifato bikdusha. So even all parts of it, even when you had to burn it, you would do it bikdusha. Okay, so now, but what is this issue about the west of the ramp? So we take the 3D pictures off for a minute and look at the ramp. So the way the ramp was, okay, here's the top of the altar. Well, now what am I doing? I'll do it that way again. So here's your altar, here's your ramp. Now the ramp was a little distant from the altar. First of all, it was a little distant because if this is going to be a right angle, you have a base here, and you've got, right, and you've got this here, right? So, so it's going to be a little distant just because of that. Now, of course, it doesn't have to be that this is straight. In theory, you could sort of, make it like this or whatever, make it accommodate. But it actually intentionally was a little bit of a gap because it says that the same way you have to be zorek the Avarim. If you take a look, Rashi quotes the previous Rashi on the previous Amud. Says, let's see if we quote the Rashi. He quotes the pasuk in the middle, "Bein kevesh lemizbeach, v'asita olotecha habasar v'hadam." The line starts with the word vadam, about 15 lines up. Madam bizrika of basar bizrika. So the same way when you're down here, okay, you're throwing the blood on the altar. So when you are putting the meats on the altar, and assumingly you're doing it from the top of the ramp, you're standing here, you have to do it bizrika. So there has to be a little bit of a gap, okay, which would be a little dangerous. I wonder if they had like a yellow line, and stay behind the yellow line. You have to be careful when you make that step over onto the mizbeach. Anyway, okay, so that's but anyway, that's what you would do. So that meant there was some access space here. Okay. Now remember, we said that the Nesachim were. If this basically is the. I'm trying to read myself. This is the south. This is the north. This is the opening.
You're looking from the east.
Right. You're coming in. Okay. So we said. Remember, he would go up the ramp and then make a left. That this is where you would do the Nesachim, right? Mm-hmm. So if they're over here. And you want a door that accesses where the stuff is going to come down, where the stuff is, it's going to be on the west side. Mm-hmm. So you would have a little trap door here on the west, okay, because the wine is coming down and it's in the wet area, whatever, it's hard to do 3D, but it's in the west side, and therefore the trap door would get into that space and they would clean out the wine. Now,
I'm sorry, the ramp did not communicate with the top of the altar.
It did not touch the top, right, there was a little bit of a gap. Yeah, you had to be pretty darn careful. So this idea. So according to Tosfos, he sees that there are three opinions. One is it was an underground cavern, which was a natural cavern. The second is it was an underground cavern, which was man-made. And this approach and this Rashi also agrees with. This approach denies that there was a cavern altogether. It just all went into a cavity inside the mizbeach. So there was dried up wine inside the mizbeach. A much simpler explanation, and they just had to clean it out every 7. How many years did it say? 70 years. What is it? 70 years. Okay, let's take a look now as the Gemara continues. Okay. My mashma, Where do you learn from this that the burning is b'kedusha, just as the libation is b'kedusha? So, Amar Ravina Asya Kodesh Kodesh, Gzeira Shava, Ksiv Hacha Bakodesh Haseich, in the sanctified place you shall do the libation. Nesech, the Ksiv Hasam V'saraftata Notar Ba'esh, you shall burn the nosar in fire. Lo Yachel Ki Kodeshu, don't eat it because it is holy. So the same way this is holy, that's holy, and you burn the notar here by when you take it out, and it's done, then you have to burn it as well. Who's it going like that, which we taught in the Mishnah? With the wine that you're using for libations, at the outset there's mi'ilah. If you were to misuse it, you would transgress the misuse of sanctified objects. Yardu l'shitin, once, however, they went into the shitin, into the cavity, ein malim behem, there's no longer any mi'ilah. So the Gemara says, Lamer Rebbe Lezer Rebbe Tzadok. That sounds like it's Rebbe Lezer Rebbe Tzadok who says that this cavity was on the inside of the altar. The Rabbanon, if it's the rabbis, Hanachtu Luhu L'Tahom, it went into the very depths of the earth. So how would there be a circumstance where you could get the wine? Right, the wine goes into the very depths of the earth. There's no access to it. The Gemara says no. Afilu Tamer Rabbanon, even the rabbis, b'di iklet. Let's say you caught it. As it was, maybe they agreed that the first it had to go through a cavity in the altar. So somebody was standing inside the cavity of the altar with a cup out, and he caught the wine before it continued to go down into the underground caverns. All right, that's a pretty hard to believe circumstance. The Igad the others say, Lema Rabbanan Hivelo Rebbe Lezer Ber Tzadok. The opposite. Maybe it's only the rabbis and not Rebbe Lezer Ber Tzadok in a weird case where you caught the wine before it went into the underground caverns. The Rebbe Lezer, it would be Rebbe Lezer. How could it say there's no Me'ilah? He says you have to burn it. It's holy. So presumably there is Me'ilah. So the Gemara says no. Afilu Tamer Rebbe Lezer, it could even work like Rebbe Lezer. There is no thing that once that its mitzvah is done with, you did the mitzvah act with it, and there's still me'ilah. So remember, we learned that by all aspects of a korban, there's no different than any other part of the korban, which is once you've done the mitzvah, there no longer is me'ilah. So just because you have to burn it because it had kedusha or might have some residual kedusha, does not mean that there is me'ilah. Okay, so now we have those different opinions about where exactly it would go. Would it just go into the cavity of the altar or continue down into the very depths of the earth? Now the Gemara says like this: Reish Lakish, Amar Reish Lakish, said Reish Lakish, Bizman shem naskin yayin al gabi hamizbeach pokakina tashiti. When they would actually do the libations, it wouldn't just all run down the tubes immediately. No, they would actually stop up the tubes, and Rashi says near the top of them. Okay, in the holy place you shall do the libations of intoxicating liquid. By mashma, where do you get this idea that means that you close the drains? So Amar Papa Sheichar Lashon Shtiyah. Sheichar means something that you drink, a drinking. Lashon Siviyah, it's a type of a drinking that satisfies you. Lashon Shichrus, and that gets you drunk. What does that have to do with anything? So basically, the idea is that if it all went straight down, it would be like you taking a drink and it would go straight down your throat. Whereas here, by stopping it up, it's like closing the drain of your bathtub. There's still a place for it to fill. It didn't overflow. There was still the funnel. Okay, but that's like you take a whole big swallow and you hold it in your mouth before you swallow. And the Gemara is going to say that is a type of a satisfied drinking. That's a type of a drinking that actually could get you drunk. It thinks that the more it fills your mouth, the more it has the power to intoxicate. So before it just runs straight down the throat of the altar, as it were, we want it to be held in the mouth. And therefore, you would first stop up the drain, and you would wait for it to fill, and then you would open the drain. Okay, so let's see what the Gemara says about this. Amar of Papa Shmamina, you hear from this, you can infer from this. Kisava inish chamra, when a person really gets like satisfied from drinking wine, migrone sava, it's from the throat, it's not from the stomach, right? So if you drink a lot of wine, it goes straight down. You don't get a sense of real satisfaction and fullness. It comes by spending time in the mouth and and holding it in your throat, and that gives you that sense of satisfaction, as opposed to food where it's more about just filling up your stomach. Right? I don't know if there are any wine aficionados here, but they do like holding the wine in the mouth, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. When you taste it, you actually spit it out.
Right.
Because you don't want to get the actually, because you don't want to become intoxicating.
Oh, but there's also the sense of enjoying it. But I assume any food, the longer you hold it in your mouth, the more it accesses your taste buds. Yes.
There's a discussion somewhere where they say that the wine goes into the drain pipe and then it eventually comes out somewhere, and that the residual that comes out is actually not able to be used by people. They would take that residual and sell it. Yeah, for fertilizer.
That's the
Was that
blood
the blood?
that they would sell.
That
The
was
blood. Oh, okay.
Blood, yeah.
Okay. So now the Gemara says like this. All right. So,
Same.
okay. I'm a Rava. Tzur b'mir Abanan. So a Torah student, which is like a yeshiva bacher, delo nafish lechamra. He doesn't yet have a job. He can't afford wine. He doesn't have a lot of wine. So maybe he gets some on Shabbos or whatever, but he doesn't have a lot of wine. Ligma gimue. So he should take these big swallows and hold it down and hold on to it, and that way he'll get real satisfaction out of the little wine that he has, rather than swallowing it straight. So it's a little counterintuitive. You should take big, gulps of it, but hold it before swallowing, and that's better than taking a lot of little, sipping it. Where are we? Rava akasa de birchasa. Rava for a kos shel bracha, like a cup of that he made a glass that he made kiddush on. So agma gimue. He also would not drink it straight down, but he'd take a big gulp and hold on to it, as showing how dear the kos shel bracha would be for him. Okay, so that's about how to drink wine. Darish Rava. Now Rava explicated. I hope not after he was drunk. What's meant by the verse? Mayafu pa'amayich bane alim bas nadiv. How beautiful are your footsteps in the shoes, the daughter of the generous ones, bas nadiv, of the generous one. So what does that mean? Mayafu pa'amotehem shel Yisrael. How beautiful are the footsteps of the Jewish people? B'shasha olim laregel. When they go up, right? So the footsteps is when they are going up. Na'alim might mean the word oleh also, not just in shoes, but in their aliyah laregel. Bas Nadiv, daughter of the generous one. Bito shel Avraham Avinu, the daughter of Avraham, our father. Shenikra Nadiv, who is called generous. Shenemar Nidivei Amin Ne'asafu, the generous ones, or it could also mean the princes, but the generous ones of the nations gathered. Am Elohei Avraham, the people of Avraham's God. So Elohei Avraham, v'lo Elohei Yitzchak v'Yaakov, the nation of Avraham's God, not the nation of Yitzchak and Yaakov's God. Ella, so this is talking about all of the other nations, gather to recognize God. So that's why we're underscoring Avraham. Ella Elohei Avraham shahayat chila legerim. Avram was the first of the converts, and that, Rashi points out, is the emphasis of the word nidiv. So nidivei amim here, right, is that sense of connected with Avraham. And why is it connected to Avraham? Avram's heart sort of motivated him, right? Kol nidiv lev. It's not just generosity, but it's that sense of the desire to give, the desire to do something. Avram's heart motivated him to get close to God, to know God, and therefore he is the father of all future converts who have this coming near, and the way the heart motivates them. So that is also when you're going up la regel, right? The imagery is you're getting close to God. So that's why you're bito shel Avraham Avinu. This desire, you leave your hometown. Lech lecha me'artzecha mimoladetcha. So maybe your artzecha is Tel Aviv, but fine. But for some people, that's also a lech lecha, and you're going, to be close to God, and that is, bas nadiv, the way Avraham, the way the Gerim draw close to God. Okay, so now the Gemara says, Tana debei Rav Anan, my deceive, what's meant by the verse? Back to that verse that we quoted before, the hidden of your area of your thighs. This is how we interpreted it before about the yerech hamizbeach. Lamanim shalu divei Torah ki yerech. So he's saying that this actually refers not to the altar; it refers to Torah. Rashi says it's because the word chalaim, as I said, the pshat of that word is like jewelry, precious stones, and the idea that the Torah was hewn from precious rocks. The tablets were hewn from precious rocks. Okay, so why is where are we? Lamanim shul divrei Torah ki yerech, like a thigh. Lomer lecha ma yerech baseter, the same way the thigh is in private, is in covered up. It's part of your body you keep covered. Av divrei Torah baseter. Torah also should be privately. You don't, Rashi quotes Gemaras, you don't sit at the top of a mountaintop and teach Torah. You do it you could do it with a lot of people, but you don't do it in a ostentatious type of a way, in a way that draws attention to what you're doing. You do it with modesty. That's what Rabbi Linzer says. What's meant by the verse? Hagid l'chadam matov. He has told you, O man, what is good. What is it that the Lord asks from you? Ki masot mishpat v'havas chesed, doing righteousness, or justice, I should say, loving kindness, and walking humbly with your God. So what does this mean? Asot mishpat, justice, zehadin, to have a land that follows laws and justice. The havas chesed, kindness, sugmilot chasadim. That's acts of loving kindness one to another. It's one thing to have law. You need a country that's built on law, but then it's the people acting with a sense of generosity and kindness and reciprocity to one another. That is accompanying a dead body to a funeral and bringing the kala into the chuppah. Rashi says, why does it say these two things specifically? Because there's a verse that uses the word lechet. Tov la lechet lebeit ha'avel mila lechet. What's the exact pasuk by Tov la lechet lebeit? Something. What? Where? Milachas or beit mishtet. So it's not exactly exactly the hachnasas kala, but of course the assumption is where would a beit mishtet be? Hachnasa kala, fine. So these are things that's afatznei al lechet, and these things you do in private. So where were we? So valodram kal v'chomer. This you can make a kal v'chomer. These types of things, taking the levaya of a mace, a wedding, normally is done in in public. Even though you're not saying not to do them in public, of course, the way you show kavod to the maid is that you have a public funeral and a levaya. The way you have the simcha chasam v'kala is that you do it in public. But even when you're doing it publicly and as a big deal, you do it with modesty. So if there the Torah says even something that's public and big of a deal, find a way to do it modestly. So hatznei alechet dvarim shedarkan lasot mitzina, things that normally are more private affairs, alachas kama kama, how much more so? And therefore, of course, also including Talmud Torah, tying that back, that Talmud Torah, is not in its nature public. It's something, there's more intimacy to it, Rabbi and the students and so on. And that certainly should do it in a modest way and not in an ostentatious way. Now, what does modesty mean in the context of hotzas meis and achnasas kala, right? Because if the whole point is to do it public and have simcha, what does it mean to do it modestly? So Rashi has two explanations, both of which I think are extremely relevant. One is, it means don't make it more about, overly indulge and make it conspicuous consumption rather than a true simcha. Don't have spend so much money and make it so much about sort of the sort of externals. Find a way to do it with a sense of truly attaching to what is meaningful here, and the simcha, or the simcha by the kala, or the experience of the kavod by the mate, rather than the distraction about all the type of ostentatious spending that you could invest in those types of things.
Or behavior.
What?
Or behavior, not just the spending.
Right, how do you behave?
It's not about you, or your profit, it's about...
Right, exactly. Meaning it's not just the people that are organizing it and what type of a wedding they're making and have they crazy overspent by a wedding, but when you're at the wedding, right, how are you at the wedding? Exactly. And Rashi says that too. It's about, how do you eat, and are you gorging yourself if it's the case of the Kasan Kala?
You certainly don't get drunk.
How do you behave? How do you behave as well? The other explanation Rashi says, which is equally powerful, is he says if you are donating money to make this happen, because when it says you have to be hachnasas meis and levayas meis hachnasas kala, partly it means personally to participate, but it also might mean when they go around collecting tzedakah for hachnasas kala. So it also means donating for it. So Rashi says, there are a lot of people involved, in making this happen. There's the caterer, there's the florist, there's the band. Rashi didn't say that exactly, but he does say, a lot of people know how much money was spent. Okay, that's necessary. That's going to have to happen. There's going to have to be the paying of the bills. But you don't go around and say to people, you know how much that wedding cost? That wedding cost $50,000, and I made it happen. I was the one who donated the money. You wouldn't believe how much the floss cost. Don't worry, I had it covered. I took care of it. So that part of the Hatznei Alechet is also in how you, in how you are able to give tzedakah. And particularly challenging when a lot of people know how much something costs, to still find a way to do it in tzniut. So if that's true in those cases, how much more so in other areas do we, even in mitzvah areas, do we have to behave b'tzniut? Okay, so now the Gemara continues. Amar Rebbe Linzer, says Rebbe Linzer, Godol ha'oset tzedakah yoter mikol ha'korbanot. Doing tzedakah is greater than all sacrifices, which is quite fascinating. How much, so often we focus on the fact that, that we have lost the sacrifices and that everything is, it's not a full service of God without the sacrifices. No, tzedakah is greater than all the sacrifices. Shene'amar asat tzedakah u'mishpat. One who does tzedakah, here being translated probably not in the original biblical way, but charity, like giving to the poor, and justice, nifchar laHashem mizevach, is more desired by God than a sacrifice. Rabbi Linzer, and says Rabbi Linzer, Gedolas Gemilas Chasadim Yosemin Tzedakah. I just got through telling you how important tzedakah is. I want to tell you that Gemilas Chasadim, which is actual acts of kindness with your person, not just writing checks, that's even greater than charity. Shenemar Zir'u lachem litzedakah, plant for yourselves with tzedakah, v'kitzru lefi chesed, and harvest it based on the kindness, according to the kindness. Im Adam Zorea, when you plant, Safek Ochel, Safek and Ochel. You don't know if it's going to sprout forth. Planting is not yet the end result. So, Adam Kotzer, when you harvest, Vadei Ochel, you will eat. So if you do acts of chesed, that is even greater. That you'll definitely be rewarded. It shouldn't be about the reward, but that you will that you will in the end benefit, or that in the end it is at the highest level. I do want to say something about the ochel, which does sound a little bit about you benefiting from what you've done or being rewarded. And it's important to note the phrase gemilut chasadim. We normally translate it as this person is nebuch, I'll help him out. It's gemilut chasadim, and the only difference is that whether it is writing a check or doing it personally. But gemilut chasadim, as we're going to see in a minute, is not limited to people that are nebuch. Gemilas, we shouldn't have everything of anybody as nebuch. But gemilas chasadim in the Gemara is even for wealthy people that are doing well, and the gemilas chasadim is helping people at any time that they need help and being there for people. The act of going to a wedding is called gemilas chasadim. A wedding of a friend. Why? Going to a funeral is gemilas chasadim. You go to my wedding, and the important point about this is not just being there for somebody, but the word gomel, if you think about it, what does the word gomel normally mean? How would you normally translate the word gomel? Right? To be gomel means to repay. So what does it mean, repaying chesed? Because there's a reciprocity to that, right? If I'm there for you, you're there for me. I help you out, you help me out. I remember once when I was in Florida, there was a friend started this thing which is called the Gemach Fund. And you think about Gemach Fund, you think about people that have no money and they need to borrow money and so on. This Gemach Fund was basically, you list things that you have around the house, like a ladder and a this and a that. And if you need, I remember once, I need an 8-foot ladder. Oh, I'll call up the Gemach Fund. Somebody else in the community has an 8-foot ladder that they can lend me. But next time they're going to need a lawnmower. And I love the idea of a Gemach Fund for upper middle class people because it was about helping each other out and the sense of reciprocity. And that is a key sense of what it means to really, embody this sense of gemilut chasadim, and I think that's part of the idea here where it says about that's where you harvest what you have given, because it really is about being there for persons, which is something you can do for anyone and anybody could do for you. Somebody who has no money could be gomel chesed, right? To be there for you, to come to your wedding, to be there at a time of need, to be a friend. Yes?
There's a woman who just started a website called Impossible,
Yeah.
where everybody offers to do things for free.
Uh-huh.
So that anything that somebody might need, if they can help you.
Oh, that's very lovely. But you mean not in sort of the local geographic community sense.
Yeah,
Like
haven't
if
been-
you're like an accountant, I'll give five. I'll do 5 taxes for free over the year, something
I
like
haven't
that.
explored the details,
Okay,
but
I'll have
I
to
think
take
it's
a look.
impossible.
Okay, impossible.
I think so.
All right, I'll take a look. Very nice. Okay, so now the Gemara continues like this. Okay, Tanu Rabbanan. Now we get into a beautiful Gemara about Gemilut Chasadim. I'm sorry, did I skip a line? Variocha. V'amar Rabbi Lezer, Ein tzedakah mishtalemet el lefi chesed sheba. The tzedakah is only rewarded based on the chesed that was a part of it. Shenemar ziru lachem litzedakah v'kitru lefi chesed. So this is not just saying chesed is higher, but it's intertwining the two. It's saying even when you give tzedakah, you'll reap the rewards based on the chesed. What does it mean based on the chesed? Based on how do you give the tzedakah? Do you just write a check and throw a check into somebody's face? Do you take care to understand who that person is, what that person really needs, how to really help that person? Beautiful Rashi. If you take a Rashi, Rashi says, second wide line, Kemilos chasadim sheba, hanatina hi tzedakah, the giving of the money is the tzedakah. V'torach, of the effort that you expend, and hu chesed. You go and molicho lebeso, you spend time with this person, walk them to their house, right? Or you try to figure out how am I going to help you with this money I've given you, that actually it should increase, right? I'll help you invest it. You give him things that he can use in an effective way. You give him money, but at the time when the prices are cheap, not when they're expensive. You really care. Okay, it's about caring. It's not just about giving the money, and that's lefi chesed shabbat. Beautiful Rashi. Tanu Rabbanan, our rabbis taught. 3 ways Gemilas Chasadim is greater than tzedakah. Tzedakah b'mamono. Tzedakah is with your just wealth, just give money. Gemilut Chasadim bein b'gufa bein b'mamono. Gemilut Chasadim is whether with your person or with your money, right? You can lend an object. That's Gemilut Chasadim. As we've seen, even giving tzedakah can be done in a way of Gemilut Chasadim. You could do a loan as opposed to a straight gift, and it's b'gufo, being there personally, helping out, participating, giving of your time and of your effort. Tzedakah la'aniyim. Tzedakah is only to the poor. Gemilut chasadim, bein laniim, bein lashirim. Gemilut chasadim, as we just got through talking about, is whether to the poor or the wealthy. Everybody needs somebody else and needs one another's help and assistance. Tzedakah, tzedakah is only for the living. Gemilut chasadim, bein l'chayim, bein l'meitim, is even for the dead. When you go and you are at somebody's funeral, right, that's what's called, right, famously called chesed shel emet. It's a chesed that you don't expect to be repaid, but you know what? It's still gemilut chasadim, because if you're there at my funeral, I'll be there. You say, no, that doesn't work. Okay, anyway, but it's a gemilut chasadim that we do as a community, and that you are there for people at that time. People are there for you, and that is a true paying back. This person, what does this person do for you in his or her life? How are you able to pay that back? How are you able to give that back? Being there for somebody can even be being there in their death. The Amar Rabbi Lezer, it says Rabbi Lezer, Kol oset tzedakah u'mishpat. Anybody that does, now we're a little bit moving from Gemilut Chasadim, but tzedakah is which we have charity. Again, it's probably not what tzedakah means in the Tanakh. U'mishpat, and justice. Ki'ilu milei kol ha'olam kulo chased. So this is fascinating. Until now, we're talking about chesed as something distinct, or your tzedakah has to be done in a way of chesed. Now we're saying, if you do tzedakah and mishpat, it's as if you achieved chesed. Shenemar, ohev tzedakah mishpat, chesed Hashem malah haaretz. The chesed of God fills the earth. Which, by the way, is important because, in a way, it is a chesed to the world to create a society built on justice. If a real society is really built on justice, which doesn't just mean laws and laws that are enforced, equally regardless of the person and their status and so on, but also a society built on justice means a society in which the wealth, and how things are distributed, and it doesn't have to mean socialism, but it means it's a society that takes care of the systemic issues and takes care of all the people in the society. And in addition to that tzedakah, in addition to that mishpat, you have tzedakah, you have people that are also giving when people fall between the cracks, right? It's as if you've created chesed. I mean, you haven't really, right? It's as if you've created a type. Exactly. Yeah. Din.
Powerful,
Exactly.
yeah.
Exactly. So although we've been talking about what chesed means, in a way, creating that type of a society that's built on true justice is as if you filled the world with chesed. Shemer Tomer, lest you say, Kol haba likfotz kofetz. Oh, anybody who wants to jump up can jump up, which means, oh yeah, sure, I'm going to devote myself to tzedakah and chesed, no problem. Talmud Lomar, my yakar chazdecha Elokim. How dear, rare are your kindness, God. Which means, as Rashi says, you're not always able, good intentions don't always lead to good results. To effectively do tzedakah and mishpat and chesed, it's not, you have to really be able to do it with forethought. Yachol af Yarei Shamayim. Okay, maybe it's even difficult for a Yarei Shamayim. Talmud Lomar, v'chesed Hashem me'olam v'ad olam al yireyav. God's chesed is on those who fear Him, which is now meaning the opportunities for doing chesed are more available to people that are truly Yarei Shamayim, maybe indicating that if you're not truly Yarei Shamayim, you never know about what other types of agendas you might have that maybe even you're not aware of. So it's not always so pashut, it's the highest level, but to do it right takes thought. Amar Reb Chamer bar Papa, Kol Am Sheyesh Lav Chen, anybody that has chen, I don't know what an English translation of chen is, not char, but whatever, chen. Okay, that's the Yiddish word. B'yadua shu yarei shamayim. You know that they are truly God-fearing. Shenemar chesed Hashem me'olam v'ad olam. God's kindness is from this world to the next. Al yirei av. Okay, where does that say chen? But assuming that again chesed is connected with chen, if God's kindness is on that person, so that person has a particular chen. Of course, this is a logical fallacy, because even if it's true that all people that fear God have chesed and chen, it doesn't mean that everybody that has chen is God-fearing, right? Everybody understand that's not the logical problem? Okay, anyway, what's meant by the verse? Pia pascha b'chachma, the Torah's chesed al lashona, the Torah of kindness is on her lips. Is there then perhaps a Torah that is not one of kindness? Yes. Elo Torah lishma, zui Torah shel chesed. If it's done for its own sake, then that's one of true loving kindness, meaning the chesed to God, presumably, that God has given you the Torah, you love Torah just because it's from God with no other sort of sense of agenda. Shaloli shma, if you have other agendas, zui Torah she'eino shel chesed. It's not of chesed, which is taking us in a different place than we've been before. But the last line the Gemara comes back is getting back to that original theme. Iga da'ami, others say, Torah lilamda zuhi Torah shel chesed. If you're learning it in order to do it, in order to teach it, then it is a Torah of chesed. It is a Torah that then you are also giving to other people. Shelo lilamda, if you're doing it just for yourself, and it's a Torah just to make yourself a Talmid Chacham, then zuhi Torah she'eino shel chesed. Then it is a Torah that is not about chesed. It's all about you. It is not about the other. Okay, and with that we will end.
Wow, congratulations on it.
Thank you. Thank you.